So what I wanted to do today was just go through and touch on data quality, because it's impacting. How's this? The data quality in NaPTAN ain't as bad as people thought, but it could be better. And what we want to do is look at how we make it better, where the gaps are, what that means for you all, so that we can do things and corral everyone into similar, if not identical, ways of doing things. And one of the things is there's 140, there's soon going to be 148 of you, because Northamptonshire is splitting in two. And you've all got your own data dialects. London does things ever so slightly differently to other people. Oxfordshire, I know that you're with Andy, but even amongst Andy's groups, there's Andy-controlled spaces, there's slightly different dialects. And I'm talking data dialects. And the same happens in Wales. Some things will be called and they're very close, but there's still those little divergences, and that's the sort of thing that I want to tackle. It's not the huge part of data quality. It's those small divergences that don't seem much inside as a local authority, but when you combine 147 local authorities, it means that you end up with quite divergent data at the top. So I kind of wanted to talk through how we're all thinking about it and things like that. And Tim, I know you've got to run away some way through this.
Yeah, I'm off at 10:30 for 3/4 of an hour or so.
Okay. We will. Well, what I'm going to do, because this pattern works on YouTube and everything, just to have this stuff. We're going to do name, pronoun, who we are, and I've put the question as, will demand responsive transport save us? Because it's the fix all that every single problem that pops up around services at the moment. Somebody's like, oh, that'll be covered by DRT, and I'm just like, okay, this is an interesting thing. So I kind of wanted to just ask people's thoughts on that, and then we'll run through the standard housekeeping. The previously on, I'm going to skip over it because yous are all pretty much there. One of the things that we're going to start doing is building a CMS, so that we're the previously on, and those decisions can be captured and published out via the website. But that's something that's going to happen next year. Hey, BB.
Good morning, Dr. J. Good morning, everybody.
So you're just in time for us to go around and do name, pronouns, which ones you like, where we're from, and will demand responsive transport save us. I'll go first. I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. Where am I from? I'm from DFT. I'm the service designer, service owner type person. I basically wave my hands and draw cartoons, although that I believe Catherine our SRO rolls her eyes whenever I say that, because she's like, you're running yourself down. And will demand responsive transport save us from what? I think living in the centre of London, I don't see that there'd ever be demand responsive transport here, although I know that there is for people with, I was going to say deeper, larger access needs. There's some good demand responsive transport solutions within London. So it's an interesting thing to consider. Tim, because you're going to run away in a bit, we'll put you up first, and then you can throw it to somebody else.
Good morning, Tim Rivet, he, him, Artig stroke DFT data person. Will DRT save us? Again, a bit from what I think it has its place. Whether it is economically viable at a large scale remains to be seen. And I'm not sure we're marketing it and selling it right at the moment to people.
And who are you going to throw it to, Tim?
Leon.
Well, thank you. Hi everyone, Leon Byford, product manager at Transport for London. Pronouns I leave up to you. DRT. So as Dr. J sort of alluded, we have the London Dial Divide, service, and that there's also more locally run sort of services, more sort of community services that are quite similar as well. But those are in a sense DRT, but maybe a bit different to what most people consider DRT. We have done a couple of trials in the past of DRT services, but I think there's no imminent plans to have new DRT services. Interesting idea, but we have to. There's lots of different nuances to this. So I'm not sure, but we'll see.
And who are you going to throw it to, Leon?
Right. So Bibi.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Phoebe. I work for DFT. My pronoun is she, her, and I'm a policy advisor at DFT, and I'm also assisting on the NaPTAN project. And I will...
Demand responsive transport, what do you think of it? Do you know what it is?
I don't, so I'm hoping to learn a lot from this morning.
And Chris, I believe it's you, because there's one last person to go.
Hi, I'm Chris Burkett. I'm with Oxfordshire County Council, and I push a lot of data around in the RTI system in Travelline and NaPTAN. Deal with bus registrations, all the boring stuff. Sorry, Tim. I'm a he, him, and demand responsive transport. This is an interesting case. I think we're still practicing. It's an incredibly expensive business in rural areas, and Oxfordshire is basically a rural county despite having a big city and several universities. We have tried it in Oxford in the form of the pick-me-up from the Go Ahead group, and it didn't last very long. And the real problem in our city was congestion. The congestion beat it. Basically, stuff couldn't get to places to pick up fast enough to make sure there was more than one person on in every minibus or whatever it was they were using. We are, however, going to roll something out over the next 12 months in one of the more rural areas, and we'll see how it goes. We have some money to do that. So will it save us? I don't think it'll save us. It could enhance certain routes in certain areas, but we'll see. Time's out. Jury's out.
Fantastic. Yeah, and we're not. The DRT people and I were going to be catching up, so I just dropped it in as an afterthought on the icebreaker, and I'm like, I think we need to do more on demand responsive transport and maybe bring them in and have a really deep discussion on what people are seeing and how people are using it, especially some of the impacts on NaPTAN and how people are using the different stops. But today I'm just going to quickly go through the housekeeping because that keeps everything nice and tidy. Run through the previously on, let you know that it's going to eventually become part of a wiki. And then the focus for today is going to be on data quality. And I wanted to bring up some ideas on data quality, especially the ideas of consistency, completeness, and accuracy, and how those three pieces interplay together. Talk a little bit about metadata, which I just remembered to do, and then as usual, little feedback corner. You can go to the YouTube channel, which is there. You can follow us on Eventbrite. We've actually got quite a few followers. It's funny, every time I publish a meeting, I have to publish the meetings and then send out the newsletter, and by the time I've gotten to send out the newsletter, there's been half a dozen people sign up for the meetings already, which is really great. And you can also sign up for our newsletter, which we now do once a month at the end of the month or the start of the month for the previous month. And it's going to give you ideas on how stable NaPTAN's been, anything that's coming up, and also if there's any problems with NaPTAN. That's our main way of letting people know, but we haven't had any problems for quite some time, touch wood. Next meetings, just a reminder that I had to tweak the dates of the March meetings because of Easter. I forgot there was a thing called Easter when I planned everything, and somebody pointed out that I'd put things on the week where most people would take time off. Then in April, one of the April ones is in May, just because of trying to make the weeks work, and May and June, and I'll put out some dates for the rest of the year. It now looks like we're going to be doing this for at least till April 2025. I was going to say the next April, so I'll try to put some dates in for all of those, so that gives people that ability to plan. Previously on NaPTAN, we've now got managed removal. It's actually now over 3,000 stops have been removed. Thank you, Chris. You've been contributing to the quiet removal of stops. One of the things, now that we're getting those dead stops out of the system, it gives us a chance to go through and really look at the data quality. So that was kind of one of those prerequisites that we needed to get in, especially for some of the larger and older areas, because stuff has moved. I mean, Chris, you only removed, what, 40 stops, 38 stops so far? Most of them were just dead.
Yeah, they're unused and dead, and they were the easy ones that are easy to replace. So, these are old custom and practice stops, so unmarked stops, or old hail and rides unmarked, that we fairly certain we're not going to be used. I have paused because I've just been told that we're resurrecting about 5 old routes now. So I don't think any of the ones I've deleted so far are affected, but some of the ones I was planning on deleting, I've just had to resurrect. But we'll see if we'll get there in the end. I don't know where we keep getting the money for these services from, but apparently they're not very expensive to run market day services.
So that's great, because that also helps me understand, because I thought you must have more than 38 dead stops, but these are also ones. Leon, we're going to come and pick up TFL in the next couple of weeks, because I know that you've got a couple that are now dead because roads have been one-wayed and blocked off and things like that. Especially, I found a few in Croydon where you totally changed the roadways, and a lot of the traffic calming pieces means that the bus can go in one direction and not in the other, so half the stops are now redundant. So I did some research to figure out how much TFL would want to get rid of. Street versus schema, that's a little bit of what we're going to be tackling today, is just trying to understand how we're trying to put stuff in to make things work, and some of the conventions that we're using, because like I said, data dialects has become a thing. Precisely and accurately, believe it or not, you're actually getting really good. We've got a little tool that's able to go and let us know how close what you're putting in your system is. If you're doing lat long conversions, Leon isn't doing them, but if you're doing conversions from Eastings, Northings to lat long, we've been able to go through and see how close they are to the Ordnance Survey, and a lot of people are very, very close. There's some people who are wildly out, and we want to sit down and tackle those, but it's looking at those. Coach references, you don't need to put them in anymore. The 900 coach stops have been withdrawn completely from NaPTAN. We've still got them floating around if anyone needs them, but nobody's come to me for over a year asking for more than a year that I've been saying this. So they're now completely withdrawn. So you also don't need to include them in your data when you're adding a new stop. So we can quietly just shuffle coach references off this mortal coil. Roadmap feedback. At the moment, our main roadmap is about accessibility. That's going to be the focus for a bit. And there's some cleanup pieces and some BAU pieces going on. So I'll bring those through, and then we'll talk about what we still need and bring some of those ideas. So BB and I can take them through to the SRO board and have a look at what we prioritise as well. I gave up trying to analyse ECHO and NaPTAN codes and how you create them. As far as I can tell, it was done however people decided to do it at the time within that local authority. Leon has a slightly different way of doing NaPTAN codes to everyone else because London. And there are some rules, and I can build you a spreadsheet to help you if you're ever stuck trying to match those rules. It's something that I've just gone, there've been so many different ways, there's no way of doing anything sane. We even built something that expected them to be alphanumeric, and then found out there's several local authorities that do entirely numeric ATCO codes, and that meant that the team suddenly had to go, oh, okay, and we had to put we had to do a little bug fix for that, because we had something that checked and was running through expecting to get an alphanumeric code, and it got numbers and just blew its mind. And with data retention, it's still working beautifully. We saved 97% of our monthly storage costs by putting this in place. Our storage costs have dropped down to less than £1.50. So we can essentially, for storing all of NaPTAN for a month. So across the 50 years plus lifetime of NaPTAN, that's actually quite a significant. It means that it's a very, very low amount of storage that we're going to need. And we're also planning on storing NaPTAN data for 100 years. So we've got it in the archive and it will sit there for 100 years. So in 2021, 28, we will remove the data from 2028. So yeah. In 100 years' time, the old versions of NaPTAN will quietly be removed. But if anyone's still around and wanting NaPTAN data from 2005, they've got quite a few years to get themselves together and come and ask us for it. So just to make sure, I kind of don't need to go through this, but I do like to, just to make sure that we're all just thinking in the same space, because I always talk about Beverly and Beryl. So this is Beryl. She lives in Bristol. She wants to see her friend Beverly, who lives in Birmingham. And what NaPTAN does is allow this multimodal, multi-operator, multi-LA journey to be built out. Because if she was traveling within a local authority on a single bus operator, she's got a bus operator portal, she's got a local authority portal, she's got all kinds of portals and spaces and journey planners planned around that single mode, that single operator, that single local authority. It's when you try to add the multiple modes, multiple operators, and multiple LAs, that it can be very complicated to plan your journey. So there needs to be journey planners that use this data to tie it all together. And that's why the journey that NaPTAN facilitates is this very complicated public transport story journey of catching a bus, then catching a train, then catching a coach, then catching another bus type thing, because that's where the complications come in, and that's where NaPTAN shows its value, because you can go across all those different modes. I'm not going to tell you how to suck eggs and run you through how all of the information kind of travels around and down and ends up back here with a consumer app that allows Beryl to catch the right bus in the right place at the right time for the right fare, which isn't on this version, because the right fare comes from BODS and TNDS now, because it's part of the TransExchange files. Fares don't matter quite so much in London because it's got its own faring system, but for a lot of the other local authority bus operators, the fares are based on where you hopped on and where you're going to, and that faring needs to be made visible to Beryl so she can choose which way to travel and be aware of the cost of making that journey and make her decision. So this be a bus stop. I know it's a London bus stop, but it was the best picture I could find. And one of the things with NaPTAN is we're effectively a what is where. That's all that NaPTAN almost does. It tells you what type of public transport infrastructure you're going to find and where you're going to find it. And yes, the what is slightly complicated, as is the where. So with the what, we've got the type of stop and the name is part of the what. What is it called? So I wanted to kind of us to take a beat or two and think about what type of are we getting the type of stop good? Do we understand the difference between a marked and an unmarked stop? When does an unmarked stop become a marked stop? That's a really fascinating question. When does hail and rides are according to the schema, unmarked, but can be marked in the real world, and what is the difference between that? So I just kind of wanted us to take a couple of minutes to think about all of those complications around types of stops, and throw them up on here. I'm going to make you do some work today. It's not all just going to be me talking. And I kind of, and Chris, think of all the different complicated types of stops that you'd love to represent. Is a DRT stop different to a hail and ride? And if a DRT area is marked on a map, is that a marked stop, or does it need to be marked physically on the road? You know, what does marked actually mean? And Tim, I know this might sound redundant, and everyone's like, but I know what marked means, but it doesn't, because I've actually had questions from people saying, how marked is marked? So maybe that's the first question. How marked is marked? What does marked mean when we go to DRT and hail and ride? What does marked mean when we don't have a bus shelter and a pole and a flag and all that stuff? Is it just a bus stop? Is it just the bus cage on the road? Or is it just a bay? Or how do we mark a stop?
Far from redundant, Dr. J, that question. Slovenia are having a very similar debate, because a lot of their bus stops are actually marked by multicoloured stripes on streetlights, and the sort of service that stops there is dependent on the colour scheme.
There are so many questions, but let's just go marked. Let's not run down that rabbit hole. Marked colours on.
I'm not aware of anybody doing that in the UK.
On light poles.
Ooh.
Yes.
Northern Ireland have some that are marked on by painted light lampposts, actually.
Leon has some. Leon's going to look at me and go, "Oh my God, do I?" Some of Leon's, and I know this solely because I watched Jeff Marsh, who I'd love to get and come and talk to us at some point. But I watched Jeff Marsh's, and he got onto geekery on buses and had a hail and ride section where all the hail and ride section was marked on the lampposts. So anywhere along the route, all the lampposts had little marks saying this is a hail and ride section. So it's a hail and ride section that's marked, and that's a fascinating thing.
I would agree, but in Oxfordshire, I would say 95% of the place wears the lamppost. I think that sounds like a remarkably good idea, but for me, marked can mean just about anything. So a pole and a flag is an obvious one. A timetable case on its own strapped to a street sign is another one, or a bus stop cage or a shelter. Now, it doesn't have to have all of those things. I will consider any one of those things could and should probably make a bus stop be considered as marked. It sounds ridiculous, but when there is just one grass verge on one side of the road, another grass verge on the other side of the road, a timetable case makes all the difference. So I don't know. I mean, that's where we would go, but it's informal. Some places will have some residual markings on the road, and then we decide that that's just not good enough, so they become unmarked. It's a movable feast, I'm afraid. I mean, it's pretty obvious in the city where everything is, we hope, but in the rural confines of Oxfordshire, it's pretty rare. We are going through trying to mark at least one side of the road with a pole and a flag, but there's an awful lot to do and an awful lot of money required.
Leon, you have a different, because your shelters are put up by each borough, aren't they?
Well, I'm not too sure on that, actually. I mean, I was just sort of looking through our data. I think all the bus stops have either sort of marked or hail and ride in our 490 data set. So I'm not personally involved in the actual data management side of things. That's another team. But that point about sort of halo-wide sections where it's marked on sort of lampposts, that was news to me. So I need to sort of look into that.
I think also one of the things is London, even when you're out in London, well outside London, in its porous boundaries where the edge of Denham and Surrey and places like that, the London bus stops are very identifiable because you've got a very clear style guide for this as a bus stop. And that is something that my driving / my occasional driving and my Google mapping around Oxfordshire, I haven't seen that same depth of branding, but I'm assuming that's because TfL franchises rather than relying on the bus operators.
Yes, we don't rely on the bus operators anymore for putting up flags. They will put up timetable cases where it suits them. If we haven't done it, now we've marked what we call the premium routes, the main routes from sort of interurban and within cities and towns, large towns. Those are premium routes, and we have a particular style of bus stop markings for those. But when it comes to, again, the rural routes, there is a mixture out there. We have got a standard sort of county plate flag that we will put up, but we're still relying on a lot of old stops from operators that originally put them up. We've still got quite a number of cast iron bus stop markings, which are usually quite preferred by some of the parish councils. They don't like to see too much progress. So
they don't want a nice fancy London style bus shelter suddenly to appear.
Well, one town very close to where I live, in actual fact, a nice little market town in the South Oxfordshire, didn't want RTI displays because they thought they were far too bright. So we wondered whether we ought to get one commissioned that had a thatched roof on it, but we never took that up.
Wow. Might be too bright. I'm going to have a 10-second timeout whine about the new the removal of the dot matrix RTIs from some of the London bus stops, being a slower walking, well, a slowish walking person who walks with a stick, being able to glance at a bus stop and quickly see if the next bus is going, if I need to sprint to make it that 20 meters because there's going to be a 10-minute wait between buses, or whether I can just kind of dawdle along, and if I make the bus, I make the bus, and if I don't, it's fine. There's going to be one coming along in like 2 minutes. I know that's a very London thing, and most people outside of London would not have the problem of deciding whether or not to run for a bus, but it's still because there'll be one along in 2 minutes. But it's just being able to look up and quickly see what's coming next. Just makes such a difference especially when it's cold and wet and you don't want to get your phone out to see the next bus, and you just want to go, do I need to sprint and hop on this one, or because if I don't, I'm setting myself up for a 10-minute shivering wait, or can I just dawdle and because there's one straight behind or a few minutes behind. But I'm assuming, Chris, that would be such a rarity in Oxfordshire. Everybody would run for the bus.
Yeah, we don't have that many frequent routes, so people know that if there's if you're near the bus stop, just double check and don't go too far away from it. And the other side is that we don't. When I was a lad, you had stops that were marked as request stops, and then certain others that weren't, and you knew that the bus would always stop there. Well, I think even in Oxford City, it's wise to hail the bus at every stop, because you never quite know whether the driver's intending to stop or not. So it's a rule of thumb here.
Yeah, I always hail, and I also now have developed if I'm running for a bus, I will run along the road in front of the bus, signaling to the bus driver in my hopping shuffle that I'm doing my best to get to the bus on time, which usually works if I'm running towards the bus. If I'm running behind it, that's a bit more of a problem. Sorry, Chris, I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. We have about 350 at stop RTI displays. My favourites are the LEDs because you can see them in all weathers and from a distance. We're replacing them with these TFT displays, which I find can be rather variable and not always easy to see, to be perfectly honest. But we say we have about 350 displays across the county, which is not an awful lot. It's about 10% of our bus stops, I suppose.
Mm.
There we go.
That's an interesting thing, and one of the things might be because we don't actually have the ability in NaPTAN to show whether or not a stop has an RTI, and that is something that maybe and this could be curious. This could be something to talk to our passengers about, especially around accessibility. Of do people prefer an RTI at a bus stop, and they would choose a bus stop that's got an RTI over and walk maybe one extra bus stop or do a slightly different travel pattern to have that security of seeing the RTI and seeing when the next bus is coming compared to not. Elephant and Castle, because they're tearing down and rebuilding the shopping mall, the shopping centre there. One of the bus stops has become a movable feast because it's having to constantly move around where the entryway is for the trucks and everything. So they took down the shelter and took down the RTI and replaced it with one of those dinky little pad e-reader things. And I will actually walk to the next bus stop rather than wait at that one because it's so hard to see the next bus, which is the next bus coming, and make my choices. I'd rather walk one more. And I was just pondering if that's just a me thing or if that's a wider passenger thing, and that might be something that we do some research on for accessibility, safety, and things like that. There's always that security in knowing the next bus.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be interesting to know. I think it's going to be very different in different contexts.
I think
so many people have got smartphones these days, but my way of thinking, if you're in an urban environment in particular, or one of the key interurban bus stops where we do have RTPI, your mother with a buggy and a child hanging on, do you really want to get your smartphone out in all weathers, plus the buggy, plus the child? And the answer is, I think they would always prefer to have a physical display at the stop. But I think you've got to be, there are places where this is going to be more applicable than others, and I think this is where we concentrate on putting the displays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just pondering as to whether this might be something that we include in our accessibility information at some point, because we're asking lots of stuff around the street furniture, and this is part of that street furniture, so that people are aware and we can do some inferences, and knowing there's an RTI stop will help people. I don't like to get my phone out because I walk with a stick. Which means I've only got one usable hand. That's things that people forget when you walk with a stick, is it takes one arm completely out of use because you've got to have it there to keep your balance, which also makes me a little bit more vulnerable for mugging. So I tend to if I'm traveling, I tend to have everything talking through my headset so that I'm not having to get my phone out and I can just use the RTIs, because I generally know the stops that I'm needing to walk to and the buses that I need to catch, and it's just knowing which of the three bus choices or which of the bus choices is going to be the best. That's a nice little bit around the type of stop, because at the moment it's very, very marked or unmarked, and then it's just bus. Although there's a bus, coach, tram, and one of the things, and Tim will probably have kittens when he comes back and hears this. Actually, I've spoken to him, so it's okay. One of the things that we're looking at is making coach stops a little bit more explicit, because they are currently just a type of bus stop. Chris, and this is an interesting little conundrum for you, would making a stop that you can catch a coach at, the idea is to have bus stops, bus and coach stops, and coach stops. So if you're going to be catching something there, it's either a bus or a coach, not by its name, but by the accessibility options that's offered by that vehicle, because a lot of coaches aren't fully accessible, whereas a lot of buses are because of their designs.
I'm sure I haven't managed to get onto any of the accessibility meetings so far, Dr. J. However, we probably have a very limited set of coach stops. Would it be useful? I'm sure it would be useful to know about that on the beforehand. They have a certain characteristics. The most common coach stops we have are not really coach stops. They are just modified bus stops for the Oxford Tube, which is a 10-minute service. It is run using coaches, but they are accessible, fully accessible, although only have very limited capacity for wheelchairs and buggies and the rest of it. But I think what you need at a coach stop is the ability to get your luggage into the side pods, if that's what it is. I'm not sure what else a coach stop would have over and above a regular bus stop.
So one of the things that we've run into, and this is working with Heathrow, is that a lot of the coaches that are coach stops, coaches stop at coach stops and buses stop at bus stops in Heathrow, and coaches can't stop at bus stops because there's not quite enough turning, especially if they're a 3-axle rather than a 2-axle. Things I have learned in the last couple of weeks. But the difference is, if it's me and I've got a heavy case and I'm traveling on somewhere and I need to catch a coach, I know that I don't need to try to struggle with the case onto the bus, because I can give it to the coach driver and they'll put it underneath, and then I can get myself onto the coach to sit down. Whereas on a bus, I've got to take the luggage on and sort it out myself. And that would impact on what I would choose to do next. Would I catch a bus for part of it? Would I catch a bus for the journey or a coach for the journey? Is part of what I would understand. And one of the reasons for separating them out is this country has no consistency on what they call, so megabus run coaches and stagecoach run buses, and there's the Reading rail, coach rail, bus rail, which is actually a coach, and there's the Oxford Tube, which is also a coach, but because of the distance that it travels, but it's set up like a bus. So it's just trying to make it obvious for somebody who's going to have that particular access need of, I walk with a stick and I have a heavy case, therefore I have 0 hands. How can I get myself onto this? Is this going to be an accessible transport for me? And what other things that I'm going to have to ask help with? So on a bus, I might ask a passerby to help me with my case. Whereas on a coach, I know that the driver will take my case and put it in the under thing, and then I can go and sit down safe in the knowledge that my case is okay. So it's kind of those small things that make the transport just a little bit more accessible in those circumstances. But I think this is kind of, again, one of those little fine refine points.
I agree. It's a very fine point. I would hope that in the majority of cases, a bus driver will actually get off and help somebody who is having an obvious trickery with case or mobility. None of our buses, for instance, have electronic or automatic ramps for wheelchairs, so the driver will always get off and operate that manually anyway. So I think knowing whether a stop is accessible to reach a stop is one thing. What they do when you actually get onto the vehicle a bit of another matter, really, to be honest. So I don't know about the merits of coach stops. We have some separate coach stops, probably only in about 6 locations in Oxfordshire, mostly for the Oxford Tube and also for the airline coaches. But that's really because we'd have multiple bus stops there. It's a very busy corridor, so you just want to keep the coaches slightly away from the buses if you possibly avoid it. Coaches can take longer to board, not necessarily though. And the Oxford Tube is set up as a bus because of the frequency with which it stops.
Yeah,
They are coaches, but they're modified coaches so they can operate more like a bus, to be perfectly honest. So a lot of the luggage racking is inside. They do have a small compartment for bicycles and extra large luggage, but you rarely see them being used in actual fact. They are used as a bus service.
I should come and there's part of me going, I should come and do the Oxford Tube and some of these kind of coachy bussy type journeys at some point. So yeah, marked is a wide variety, and I think it's giving us thoughts on how we think about marked, and I do like the picture that somebody, I think Chris, you must have put in of a marked stop, which is a little flag on a keep clear, with no raised curb. It's just the side of the road, and that's saying to somebody, well, if you stand here and wave, the bus will stop for you. So it's and I'm there's part of me going, how do we define marked, and is it just anything that indicates a presence beyond a patch of ground? Seems to be kind of the vague consensus right now. It's marked as a very binary. The moment you start to mark it, it becomes marked. But that might need a little bit more diving into. The next one is naming conventions. I was looking at some for Northampton yesterday that are called Little Chef. As far as I'm aware, Little Chef went out of business quite some time ago, and the physical thing that they're indicating that you could see at that stop has been pulled down by now or turned into something else. So what are the things that we do around names? Leon, I know London might be slightly different, but again, because London, but Chris, naming conventions, how do you decide how to name a stop currently? And Tim isn't here, so you can and don't worry, don't refer me still null point if you refer me to the schema.
Well, the schema is quite helpful in most cases. It's the naming of a stop. We generally try and use a crossing, so a road that goes across, which is where you get very few bus stops that are on a long straight road. We look for obvious public buildings. We look for obvious parts of the geography. If there's a river there, river bridge or whatever. It can get rather difficult. It's far easier in towns. There's always a crossing or a nearby street that you can refer to. I like the use of the travel line notation, which is where the full name combines the locality in front of the bus stop name, but it does lead to all sorts of problems. So if we're not supposed to put the locality name in the bus stop name, we try and avoid that. It isn't always possible because otherwise you end up with 150 stops called Village Green and 150 called Turn. So if it's sort of Chalfont Turn,
Turn, TERN.
TURN. So these are the countryside roads that go off to a village that's offline of the route. So it's the turn for Old Chalford, let's say. But you want really in a timetable to have the Old Chalford as the locality, comma, turn. otherwise you end up with Old Chalford, Old Chalford Turn, if you see what I mean. So
Yes.
it's difficult, and when there is no other redeeming feature there, you've got to refer to the locality, either in using the locality or using the bus stop name, or both. It gets difficult in those cases. So quite a lot of main roads go along, and all you've got is a turning to get to the village that are just off route. So that's what can get difficult. And there's no other redeeming features other than hedges and wheat fields.
Hedges and wheat fields. And somebody running through them. No other features in the landscape. Coming from parts of New Zealand where there were no, I can't spell features today. Features. There we are. Coming from New Zealand, I see the landscape here as being full of things compared to like the Taranaki Plains, where my family is a little bit from, which are just large flat dairy farming. As far as the eye can see, and you can't even see the rivers because the rivers are just kind of dips within the flat, but you can't see them at all for miles. So yes, I find even what you consider quite empty places with hedges and wheat fields, to me they're full of lots of stuff because there's stone walls and many other exciting trees and things like that. Not that we don't have trees in New Zealand, there's just very, very different ones here. So, Leon, a London naming.
Yes. I actually managed to dig out this 9-page document called Bus Stop Naming Policy. So essentially, the way it works is that there's a number of priorities. So first of all, it's transport interchanges. So if a bus stop is near a transport interchange, we would typically try to name it after that. So rail stations, underground stations, and so on. The next one down is significant landmarks. So if there's no railway station nearby, we would try to name it after some sort of landmark, which public buildings, hospitals, tourist attractions, major churches, shopping centres, and so on. The next one down is major road junctions, and then there's the sort of other category. So that's broadly speaking the how it works.
I'm road junctions and then others. There's an area I'm going to show, and I'm showing it simply because it meets your requirements, but it's slightly crazy. Let me go to King's Cross. And everyone will be like, you are the ultimate in bus geek. So this is King's Cross, St Pancras area, and there's a number of different bus stops around here. So we've got this one on York Way, King's Cross Station, York Way, really obvious. We've got this one here, King's Cross, St Pancras Underground, stop E.
Dr. J, I'm not sure if you're meant to be sharing your screen.
Sharing. Have I forgotten to share my screen all of this time and nobody's called out, Jay, you're talking about stuff and you've forgotten to share your screen? Seriously, people. So I'm now sharing my screen. We've got King's Cross, St Pancras International. It's a place where I've spent a fair amount of time over the years. This is York Way, makes sense, no problems. This one says King's Cross, St Pancras Underground, stop E. This one says, but it's spelt St Pancras, King's Cross St Pancras without the underground, stop D. So two stops side by side have different names. King's Cross, St Pancras International and King's Cross Station. This one here is St Pancras International, and this one here is St Pancras International, and this one down here, King's Cross Station, but doesn't mention St Pancras. And that is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stops that are within that same King's Cross St Pancras. So this is why I brought up naming, because it's trying to understand. Oh, and there's another one here. St Pancras International. Okay, so that one is at least next to St Pancras International. But it's just trying to understand how the. So here's a question: should all these stops be called the same thing, with their indicators, or should they be called slightly different things? Weirdly enough, the ones that say underground are actually slightly closer to the station than the underground because they move the underground slightly. So the underground now sits about here. It's slightly in the wrong place. The entrance is over this way on the edge of the station, but it's also up here, which is not indicated. There's also an underground entrance here. So there's quite a lot of little pieces around the station that we eventually need to fix up, Leon. This is not picking on you. This is taking an example and going, so when it comes to naming, should all the bus stops within that same grouping have a name that is the same and it's more about the indicator, or is them having all those slightly different names actually a valid point? And I'm curious, not challenging here. Leon's going to go, I'm about to go and rename all the stops around King's Cross and Pancras to be consistent.
I mean, I would say is, I mean, I have no involvement in terms of bus stop naming, and the teams who sort of manage the NaPTAN data, don't have involvement in that either. But I think there are cases where, I mean, you have to look at it on a sort of route level as well, in terms of a bus route, and what stops would appear on that route. You could potentially have two stops that are near each other on the same bus route, and so you need to have a way to distinguish between them, because sometimes you can end up with quite similar names and then you're not sure which stop is which. I
can show you how you do that. Yeah.
Sometimes you have like a stop area which has a few bus stops in it. It can be helpful to have slightly different names if one is sort of on a side street or something like that. But I think it's a lot of this is sort of historical as well, so it's a tricky one.
We tend to name stops in a stop area similarly, and then usually put some sort of identification roundel on them, which I think you do quite a lot in London. We don't do it so much unless it's a congested sort of city centre area. But I think I was always told, I don't know how true it is, but put stops in a stop area so that the specific sort of timetable software doesn't try to stop at every single stop along the side of a street. If they're part of a stop area, you will only ever be able to stop at one of those. I don't know how true that is this day and age, but that's one of the reasons why we allocate stops into stop areas, generally with the same name, not necessarily, depending on, as you say, where they are, on whether they're down a side street. I
was going to, because as everyone knows, Elephant and Castle is the place. Because it's really fascinating because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of branches for Elephant and Castle. So there's these ones are just Elephant and Castle Station. These ones are, they're by the London College of Communication. They broke it out of Elephant and Castle. These ones, Elephant and Castle London Road, because that's that road. These ones are Elephant and Castle Newington Causeway, and these ones are Elephant and Castle New Kent Road. So it's got that ability to quickly distinguish between which of the arterial roads that you are stopping at, because a couple of my buses come down London Road and turn up and go Newington Causeway, so you end up with them stopping somewhere along London Road, and which is, you can walk between the bus stops. It's that London thing of there's less than four. Everyone should be around 400 meters. What is it? 95% of London is 400 meters or less from a bus stop. You're 6 feet from a rat and 400 meters from a bus stop, is kind of the usual London thing. So I just kind of wanted to show another version of something very, very similar. But this one, all of the names are a lot more consistent in some ways. There's still weird broken bits around the entrances for Elephant and Castle and the rail station, but I'm aware that all of this is just a ginormous construction site in various ways at the moment, and will probably change quite drastically as things finish being built. But I just kind of wanted to bring up other various ways of doing the same, of doing similar naming. Not to pick on London, it's just the place that I can physically go and walk around and figure out quite quickly. So the next thing that I just wanted to touch on is the wearing, because I've got here, for each of this pair of stops, I've got them on Apple, Google, and OpenStreetMaps. And there's actually quite a decent, and this is the best zooming that I could do. But we end up with quite a variation on where the bus stops are located. These are missing the road by a long way, and that we don't think is a lat long conversion problem. It's a tagging them in the right place problem. Although I'm going to go do a little bit more work because it's so consistent across all three of them. It's tagging them. And I also am trying to get Ordnance Survey so that I can go in and get an Ordnance Survey view of the same, which will use the eastings, northings, and that way I can definitively say it's a conversion problem or a tagging problem on some of these. Whereas some of these, you can see that they match relatively well on both Apple and Google to the physical spaces, but on Open Street View they're kind of a little bit more vague as to where they might be. And this matters when we're starting to talk to blind and visually impaired users who are reliant on their GPS on their phones to tell them where to stand. So this is one of those little accuracy things that's tying into, or data quality things that's tying into accessibility, of just trying to figure out. So Chris, it's probably more of a question to you than to Leon, because Leon doesn't do this in quite such detail. How do you figure out where a bus stop is at the moment? What do you physically do for it?
Well, we do very few site visits. They just don't have the resource or the budget to do that. We will survey a route occasionally and actually stand there and look at the lat longs or eastings and northings on your mobile phone. But the way that I do it mostly is by using the Ordnance Survey best quality mapping that we have. Being a county council, being a local authority, we've got obviously quite a long standing relationship with the Ordnance Survey, which is why we prefer the eastings and northings, because a lot of the GIS in the county council is set up to use the master map series. So we don't use longitude, latitude much at all. In fact, if you try and draw the map on that, it gets quite tricky at times. Because, as I say, the system GIS, the main GIS system we use, is set up to use OS grid references. What I will do is to get the best possible mapping to meter accuracy on the Ordnance Survey master maps, and then I will put that into our systems, which will do the conversion for me, I hope.
You do, and believe it or not, I'm going to touch on that in a second. And so, quick question for you, because I know that it came up, and it's one of the things that's usually in the agreed list. Where do you centre your 1x1 meter these days? I know previously it might be something else.
Right. Now, this is It's an interesting one, this. If in doubt, if it's on an RTI route or a main route in particular, if in doubt, I'll put it at the departure end of the bus stop. So if it's a bus stop cage, it can tend towards that departure end. We'll try and get it as close to the bus stop flag and pole as possible in the majority of cases. But if in doubt, and in certain places where buses can be seen to be departing early, unquote, it can be because you've put the bus stop, the location of the bus stop, too close to the middle of the bus stop, and there's GPS wobble, and the whole thing sets off. So if it's on an RTI route, we can tend to put them towards the departure end of the bus stop area. In other places, we'll try and, rural areas, there's no hope of RTI buses or whatever. We'll plonk the data as close to the bus stop flag and pole as possible where it exists. I entered the details into the DEVA system using their coordinate system, which is, in fact, I think they use the Transport for London grid data, which is very akin to the Ordnance Survey, but presumably you don't have to pay royalties to Ordnance Survey to use it. So in the DEVA system, we'll then convert that to lat long. WGS 85, is it? The standard sort of Google lat longs, rather than the Ordnance Survey. Ordnance Survey lat longs refer to the flat mapping system in the same way that the grid reference system does. So they're nonsense. But then I will go back and check, and we can visualize the bus stops. We've got a way of visualizing them on Street View. A colleague of mine has set that up so we can just click on a map and have a look at the Street View, and it just gives you confidence that you have put them in the right area. It's not accurate, but we can then see what happens in reality. Does that help?
That does. So because one of the things that we usually say is we mark it where the passenger needs to stand, and then which is usually co-located with the flag and the pole. Within that 1 metre by 1 metre is usually, besides the flag and the pole, is where the passenger needs to stand. And if there's any doubt, like the flag and the pole is slightly distant or whatever, it's always where the passenger needs to stand. And that was kind of one of the things that we came to in one of the public meetings, and I just wanted to check whether it was still an understanding and was something that we'd been able to do in practice, or whether that was more a desire.
Well, I think I was in that meeting when that was decided or discussed, and I'm fairly convinced that the departure end of the bus stop cage is more or less where you're going to have to stand to catch the bus anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's too different from that. If it was at the approach end, I think we've got a problem, but we don't do that because it messes up the AVL tracking.
Yeah, and it's also, so the bus pulls in and stops, and then you hop on the bus, and it's usually at the top end, because unless it's, and this is where it becomes slightly more differenter in London, because you've got the multiple bus stops where you've got 3 or 4 buses that will arrive sequentially, and they all just stack up. You find the bus that you're after and hope that you've hopped on the right bus. Have done that at least once, hopped on the wrong bus, and because I counted wrong, and then the buses move off. The buses all just move off, and the next lot come in. Those, I think, are almost a London problem because of the frequency of service. Most of the other bus stops around seem to be very much, here's the flag, the pole, and beside it, here's kind of where you stand, and that's where the bus stops, which is at the top end of the cage, or the departure end of the cage.
Yeah. We have a few stops like that, and it's in those cases you'll always put the bus stop on the map at the departure end of the cage because of that.
Perfect.
Multiple reasons.
Yeah, and is that, and Leon, is that kind of your understanding as well?
So I think the way it's supposed to work, and certainly bus drivers are informed of this, is that people stand at where the flag is, and if there's a queue of buses, then it is possible for a bus to stop away from the flag to let passengers off and even pick passengers up. But if there is someone waiting at the flag, then the bus should proceed and then stop again at the flag to pick passengers up there. That doesn't always happen, unfortunately, but that's how it's supposed to work. In terms of how we record the data, I'm not sure how that process works. That's a slightly different team who do that. But it's interesting to hear that Chris, you also use Diva. I noticed in your, I think 340 is your data set.
That's right. Yeah.
And you also have, so I see you have, not just easting and northings, but also longitude and latitude, whereas we don't seem to in our 490 data set, which is interesting if we're both using Diva. So maybe that's something for us to review. Why that?
Yeah, it's all done automatically. I'm sure that Andy Hull could, or whoever manages your data and system in Diva, could figure that one out. We just do it routinely. But I've never entered lat long. It's always calculated from there. I presume it must be okay because, as I say, a colleague of mine maps the lat longs onto Google Maps, and they always seem to be in the right place.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we've been able to do over the last bit of time, what we did is I don't think it's you, but it's one of Andy's, so it's done on Diva. What we did was we took the given lat long and the Ordnance Survey lat long and compared them, because we took the eastings, northings, and we calculated using the Ordnance Survey what lat long it should be using the Ordnance Survey calculation, then looked at what you'd done it, because this is going to bring up ones where there's massive differences. What we're looking for is how close it is. Now, this here is all the stops at a local authority done by a histogram of distance of how far. Now, this is the furthest out one was 1.1 meters out. The closest one was 0 meters out. This is obviously a very, very good local authority where all of the stops are, their lat long and their eastings, northings are very, very close together. Now, that's the only way that we can do a way of matching it up. It's probably not, it's not ideal. It is going to have a little bit of wobble in it, but what we're looking for is people who are 5, 10, 250 meters, 50 meters out, because that's enough that it's going to impact on a passenger. Being this kind of wobble here almost seems to be about the average style wobble of anything up to a meter out is going to impact. It is not really going to impact a person or a passenger travelling. Beryl is going to be within a metre of the bus stop, even if or Brenda, who's blind, travelling with her guide dog Barry, is going to be within a metre or so of the flag in the bus stop, even if the eastings, northings, and the lat long are slightly out. This is one of the things that we've been able to go and figure out and find through creating a little tool to run off and do some of this analysis. So we're going to do this for everyone who produces latitude, longitude, and just have a look at how close things are. There are some that are wild. There are some people who've used translators that are not accurate to the right level. So this is something that's on a Diva system. So we knew that it was going to be tight, and one of the things was just making sure that all of the Diva, anything that was on a Diva system, was within about the same range. If we see stops that are outside of that range, we know that there's a problem with we know there's a problem somewhere in the system. If there's something that's more than a meter out, we know, and they're on a diva system, it's like, okay, this stop might not be in the right place, or for some reason you've accidentally overwritten the lat long in the system. So it's allowing us to look at those stops that need to be looked at, rather than saying to everybody, oh, you need to be within a certain point. That's kind of what we're looking at. So my question is that kind of finding by exception the right kind of way to be looking at this? So if I
it probably is.
Yeah.
You say this is information from one of the Diva clients, and it goes over, I think it's 1 meter 10 at the maximum here. Is that right? Is that meter 10 on the bottom? Okay.
Yeah.
Have you, because you do calculations as well, don't you, Dr. J, in the NaPTAN system? You do the conversions. You don't. Oh, you stopped doing it.
No,
okay.
We stopped doing it, and that's been a cause of some contention.
Okay. Right.
Because also we stopped doing it because we were doing it so wrong. Our conversions were not good conversions, and that was leading to a lot of the problems between bus operators and local authorities as to where stops are. And this is allowing us to go, okay, so when people are giving us lat longs, we can see that this local authority, which I think is Bath, but I could be wrong, because I just grabbed one of the representative histograms, is a goodly data set. It's sitting within a range. It's well distributed. It's not got wild variations, or it's not got a tail that runs off to 250 or 500 miles or what. So, but some of them actually have a very long tail running off to the right here, where you've got a few that are very, very out of space. So I was just trying to, so one of the little side projects that we're going to do as BAU is potentially go through and really dive into finding those exceptionally out stops, ensuring that they are active stops, and if they are active stops, working with the local authority to locate them correctly.
Sure, that's a good idea. But I mean, you've got a meter here. The Eastings and Northings that we pop in are only to a meter. So you're looking here at just rounding errors, aren't you? I mean, that's really what this is. Yeah.
And it's not, which is fine. And that's is around 1 meter. And that's true because it is just, and also Eastings Northings is a flat projection, and the OS is is also a flattish projection, because we don't give the height of every stop. We just use the same flat projection for everything, and the Diva conversions appear to be like rounding. It is right at the bottom end of the decimal places. It is those few meters. What we're not wanting people to do is to give us it down to atomic level. There are some people who are giving us the conversions or the converted versions down to this is 2 atoms over from this one. And I'm like, no. Let's go back to looking at, if we're coming down to a decent rounding, being able to say, look, all of the bus stops at this local authority are within a meter of where they should be. That's more than fine. So, and this is kind of almost where we want to corral everyone towards. It's going to take us some time, but this is saying your Eastings, Northings, and if you give a lat long, it's there. Leon, what we might do for London, and we're looking at what we do when people don't give us a latitude, longitude, is look at the converted. We convert it into lat long and then use that to do some street view and check that you can actually see the stop, or you can see the stop at that, or the stop is centered on that latitude, longitude that we put in, and check and do some visual checks of things. But that's an extra layer of smart smart data stuff that will be secondary after finding people who are putting in lat longs that are a bit wild. Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say there is in the DEVA system a couple of slight errors, not errors because they work beautifully. They just work as not as expected. The DEVA mapping system, which is where you place the bus stops manually, is based on OSM. And of course, there are inherent problems there. And it uses snapping points for the geolocation that go to the nearest georeferenced road. Well, sometimes you have to move a bus stop location closer to that road in order to get the proper snap point. Otherwise, it snaps off to somewhere half a kilometre away. Now, it's a question of being OpenStreetMap. Somebody, any old oik can come along and change the data in there, and sometimes you find that somebody has been, you haven't got a clue who's done it, and changed a road to be inaccessible to buses. So if you're not careful of your map, you're actually doing a 3-mile detour to travel 200 meters, 200 yards, as it were. So you have to keep a constant eye on it. And being OpenStreetMap, it is not written in stone. And sometimes, as I say, the snapping points will defer to if you get the georeferencing wrong, or if somebody changes a road name in the background, it can throw it out of kilter because the snapping point will no longer appear on the road where you expect it to be. So you therefore have to move the stop in order to get the snapping point to work properly.
Oh, technology. Yeah, because that does help explain some of the one might say peculiarities of OpenStreetMap, which is this one. One of the interesting things is it seems to be, at least for Hockeridge Wood, which is, as you all know, is my favourite stop out the back end of Cheshire. At least they get these 2 stops, but they don't actually get these 2 stops right because the stops are not opposite each other and they're in the wrong place in relevance to this road. So one should be here and one should be down here. So there's actually, it's not quite mapping the physical, and this is kind of one of the things I need to go and talk to the LA and just have a look at, is this representing a previous version of them? But they're also so inaccessible. they're the ultimate in inaccessible stops. They're basically a little patch of concrete besides a 60 mile an hour A road with or B road with no footpath and just mud. So you risk life and limb just stopping to take photos of them. Chris, you were on mute.
Yeah, I know this sort of problem, and OpenStreetMap is based on, that mapping down below there is very representative of it, in actual fact. So it draws a pretty picture on the final version, but if you go into the editing mode, which I will do when required to do so, it's very much based on quite very thin lines, which one tries to trace to the overhead maps. It's not always terribly successful in a lot of places. Some of the rural areas, the lines don't actually match up terribly well. But if I find that it's putting my bus stops on the same side of the road, I will go in and realign that road in OpenStreetMap because it's clearly wrong.
Oh, I need to log in, and I've never logged in.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I can see, so I could actually move these to be in the right place if I logged in.
I don't know about that.
I also love the fact that it's NaPTAN verified as no, and I'm like, it's in NaPTAN. I know. So what does NaPTAN verified mean? I just have so many questions. Many questions about, but OpenStreetMap is not the focus of our meeting. We're going to go back and talk about data quality and play around some more. So the next one of the awareness is locality. Now, this leads on to a data quality problem that I need to tackle in MPTG, which is the layering of our data within MPTG, is missing a couple of layers. We go from Oxford to England. We don't have Oxfordshire in the middle. There's other pieces that aren't quite there at the moment. And this is kind of one of the things that I wanted to look at, and it's effectively use how you use locality in your systems, in your travel planner, and the associated travel planners and things like that, just so that I can sit down and really start to nut out what pieces need to be fixed in NaPTAN and what mess can just be this is what we need and it's a bit of a mess. Your thoughts?
I like the use of localities where the locality means, is actually drawing attention to a particular area of a city or a particular village, hamlet, or whatever. But as I say, I think I've said already, I like it the way that Travelline do it, which is to put the locality, comma, bus stop name, because then when you write down the sequence of bus stops that comprise the journey, you can see that you're travelling from Oxford city centre to Oxford to New Hinksey to Abingdon to somewhere south of Abingdon, the rest of it, and it becomes quite obvious in that sense as to where you're travelling. The problem is with localities is that they are different from the street gazetteer, which can cause problems, and sometimes you'll get a parish councillor who insists on having a bus stop in his parish because that's where it is actual. So on the outskirts of Didcot, for instance, you come across Didcot, but actually you're actually in Harwell parish. Now Harwell is a beautiful little village 2 miles down the road, so if you actually put the locality as Harwell, everybody thinks you're 2 miles down the road in a pretty little village, whereas in fact you're on the outskirts of a rather large housing development which is all part of Didcot town. So it's good that we can actually use localities that are different from the street gazetteer, but it can get confusing at times. I'll try and think of some other examples.
Yeah, if you can put up the spelling, because I'm trying to spell the words that you're saying, and I think it's Didcot and Harwell Parish, but I was just like, I'm sure
You've got Harwell correct there. Didcot 1T.
Oh, 1T, cool. And then it was Abingdon for the route that you gave
single
from.
B, single Bravo.
I'm not doing too badly then. I just have
right.
I just throw extra letters in. Leon, because one of the weird things of London is like, I know, because it's about to be elections, I know the electorate that I'm in, I know the parish that I'm in. None of those are used for where I live. Everyone uses Elephant and Castle. Nobody uses Chaucer Ward or anything like that. So I was trying to figure out, Chris and Leon, if this is a London thing of not thinking about the parish or the ward that you're in, or whether it's a more universal thing that there's very few people who really care about what ward or what parish they're in.
I mean, I sort of think that, I mean, we have sort of wards and things, for primarily sort of elections, really, and that's pretty much the only thing that they're used for in terms of the general public. So I think sort of people, the public generally think of more to do sort of general areas, and those don't necessarily reflect the sort of electoral wards, really.
Mm-hmm.
You might think of a particular area, and I suppose locals will know an area by a particular name, but that won't reflect necessarily the sort of political ward that they're in.
So is it so here's the question: should the locality be the local name for somewhere?
My personal view would be yes. We're trying to aid with navigation. So,
Yeah.
if you sort of have a general area and if you sort of ask someone, okay, how do I get to this particular area? Then I think that it's useful to sort of use the names that people would use in sort of general conversation.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's useful. We have a bit of what I consider to be a bit of an issue around Banbury in North Oxfordshire at the moment, because there's an awful lot of development going on the periphery. And what you tend to get is a general name for an area across the north of Banbury. There are 4 or 5 of them, but then you've also got to be careful, because the developer will try to get you to use or adopt the name of that they have actually placed on the development that they've been doing. So you've got to be a little bit judicial about how you name it. And whereas I always try to refer to my colleagues in the county council teams, the public actually probably know an area by the name of the housing estate or the new development that has been set up. So it's a whole mixture of things, and of course names change as well over a period of time.
I mean, like, just thinking on that and just running this through so that I understand. So, for example, I live very close to, so my location is not directly revealed on Tinternet. I live opposite, or I live very close to the Haygate, or what was the Haygate, that's now called Elephant Park, or something else, because it was redeveloped and it's now 4 or 5 smaller housing estates rather than one ginormous one. I know something similar is happening to the Aylesbury, which was huge, which is being redeveloped, and the pieces that are being redeveloped are getting slightly different names by the developers as different centres. Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about, Chris? So
yeah, it is. I'm getting pressured to call a certain part of the Oxford city North Gate. Now we've got a West Gate. We don't have an East or South Gate, but because the university has put up a building towards the northern part of the city centre, and they've called it their Northgate development. I'm trying to work out where this name Northgate has come from, because I've never heard it used in Oxford widely. So do we go with that, or will it all eventually become known as Northgate, or can it just stay as the Magdalen Road, as we call it at the moment? There's a lot of pressure at different times from different people, and the university is not usually very quiet about what they want. We'll see what happens on that one. But we might have to rename a certain suburb of or inner sanctum of the city centre Northgate. I don't know. We'll see.
I know Magdalen is not spelt Magdalen. I know that it's one of those words that's just got lots more letters in it. I've just made a note for myself. I'll go back and fix the spelling up. So we've just touched on, Tim, just to catch you up, because while you were away, we finished talking about the type of stop. We then got on to naming and talked a little bit about features and Hedgewood and Wheatfields, and that London's got a 9-page document. We went through a couple of examples where how names may not be quite that simple, and one of the things that we're talking about was the route level stops and showing the side roads, and I used Elephant and Castle London Road, Elephant Castle Newington Butts as an example of 2 very close stops that some routes will call it both of them, or some will go Elephant Castle London Road, Elephant Castle New Kent Road. So they're within the same space, they're just on different sides of the roundabout. So they're kind of using that to show the side streets, or the different areas, and the stop area is very much Elephant and Castle. And then we went on to talking about the where, looked at the mess that you get, talked about having a few site visits, using mobile phones to figure out where we are, and and using master map and some of the little bits and pieces. I also showed here, we've been doing some work to try to figure out what looks good and what doesn't look good. So this is a histogram of the distance of the difference in distance combined of the lat longs from what was reported by the local authority and then what was calculated by us using the OS survey. And this 1 meter difference is essentially rounding all the way across. It'll be a rounding, it's a rounding error. So if we've got a local authority that's basically sitting within rounding error, to me that's completely fine, totally banging. This is good. It's when we've got ones that are 10, 20, 50 meters out, those are the ones that we're going to start to manage by exception. And we just kind of talk through some of the pieces, including OpenStreetMap snapping points. And Chris suggested I try editing. I then went into edit mode and realized I have to sign up and just don't have time, but I'll run through and have a look. And in the next meeting, I'll go through and edit or look at Hockeridge Wood in edit mode and see how crazy it is. So look out for that recording, like and subscribe. We then got, hey, if I'm running a YouTube channel, I've got to say all the words. We then, on the where, we then touched on locality. So we've been talking about how the travel line convention with locality bus stop name works really well, although there's a couple of little bits and pieces that are going different, and the way wards and parishes, it's very much about the local name. And also then we then got talking about housing estate names and how they change. So the Haygate is now Elephant Park, and has quite a different profile. The Aylesbury is being changed in a similar way. And then Chris brought up Northgate in Oxford City that's on Magdalen Street. Thank you, the person who put that in for me. I really appreciate that. So that how do you know when people know it as that? Do you go by the developers, I'll call it this, or because that's what the new people will call it, or do you go by what the old people would call it? Because all the people who were there prior to the development would call it, rather than just the old people. So it's kind of an interesting pieces around locality. So we've got about half an hour left, and I was going to get on to the next piece, which is the bit that I'm trying to nut out. So there's 3 dimensions of looking at data quality. And I thought if I put up, what does consistency mean to you and your data? What does accuracy mean to you and your data? And what does completeness mean to you and your data? And again, I'm going to do I know these may sound redundant, but it's using all 3 lenses to look at a single field. I think we actually get a much better view of the data quality within the field. For example, I know there is a local authority, I'm not going to name which one, that puts a lot of default fields in. That means that they are consistent and complete because they've got something in there for every row. Every bus stop has something filled out in this field, and they are consistent in that everything is very much the same, but they are not accurate in any way, shape or form, because it's just a default value all the time, most of which is just a dash. So it's kind of like, what do these terms mean to you and your data? And Chris, this is probably mostly you, but what does consistency mean to you when you're thinking about your data? What do you think of when I say consistent?
Oh, don't know. Making sure the name is relevant, that it's in the right place. Can't think much more than that, really. For me, the most important thing is getting a name that is recognizable and meaningful, if at all possible. Making sure that the location or the locality that it's in is meaningful as far as possible, and just making sure that it's placed as accurately as possible on a map. So those are the consistent things. direction of travel, all the basics, but only the basics, to be perfectly honest. Can't think what else to say.
No, I think that's really good. And there's one that I missed. Oh, did I put down location accurate where it is? Leon, is your understanding similar? Would you agree or disagree with any of those?
I think that's right. I mean, to me, consistency is, about are the same sort of patterns or conventions being followed across an entire data set, and this can be done on a number of different levels in terms of just looking within one particular part of a data set. Are these particular points consistent amongst themselves, and then also are they consistent with things that are outside that particular data set? So one thing, one example was about actually how do we, where do we put the locations of bus stops? Should it be where, and I think the sort of national consensus is, it should be where someone needs to stand to catch the bus. So, but is that consistent across, NaPTAN? Is that consistent across a particular local authority's data set? Things like that. If you think about, and I have to say this because it came up yesterday again, the sort of stop names and things like, okay, on our website, the stop names often have slashes in them, but in NaPTAN, they don't. And so in third-party applications, they also don't. So there's a lack of consistency there between what we have on our website and what we have elsewhere.
That's interesting. I've been playing with your website. It was doing some bonkers routing for me from what was it, Euston to Vauxhall, because it should be an easy thing. But what it wasn't flagging up is the escalators are out, and it's a spiral staircase that you suddenly get redirected to, and I suddenly find myself redirected to a spiral staircase, and that suddenly made sense as to why it was telling me to leave and catch a bus for part of the journey, which made no sense because it wasn't flagging up. By the way, escalators are out, and you're gonna curse yourself about halfway down these spiral stairs, because spiral stairs are the devil's stairs, because they're unequal for both. They're slightly different size for each leg, which means that it's much harder when you're walking with a stick to maintain your balance and keep your legs the correct weighting. Anyway, that's just a weird aside. Your website sometimes does things and doesn't tell you. Back to stop names. Website has slashes and not NaPTAN. Cool. That's consistencies. Yeah.
Can I just add to that as well? For years, we've avoided using proper punctuation, such as apostrophes. And I absolutely hate this. I always wish, but I was always told, and I think it's true, it's probably a bit like the slashes, you can't guarantee that all downstream processors can handle apostrophes. I have tried a cheeky couple over the last month or two, and everything seems to be fine as far as I can see it. But it is again, it's rather like your slashes there. I think it's down to the character sets that are actually involved. How they're processed, don't know.
That is quite frankly bonkers, because it is using. I won't send you plain text as not plain text, because it's a really interesting hour-long lecture on what is and isn't plain text and what counts, etc. But this, as far as I'm aware, there's a certain amount of punctuation that is allowed, and I'm now planning myself for running off and referring to the schema, that people downstream should be able to handle, and it is about how we publicize what character sets there are. If putting punctuation in makes the passenger's life easier and more accurate, they're more able to identify the place and not have that whole, oh my god, I can't believe they can't put an apostrophe in because I'm spelling a word with an apostrophe in on a search engine, but I need to not put it in on my travel planner to make that same journey, that's going to be really annoying. So that is one of those things that I think we can start to look at around the state of quality and go, if it's a text field for a name, it's in this character set, and it's which allows this, and just start to be a lot more explicit. Tim's looking at me going, you're going to break things.
No, I mean, it's always been a problem. I think for stop names, it's going to be quite interesting over the next year or so with some of the more basic on-bus audio-visual systems that are LED based, to see what breaks and what doesn't, because whilst they should be able to cope with all the allowed punctuation, I know at least one supplier's system ignores apostrophes. The display is technically capable of doing it, but it's getting filtered out somewhere. So they might fix it, they might not.
I would say another thing that might help in the consistency line is in NaPTAN. Having, and it might already exist, I just don't know about it, but in having a series of aliases, and I'm thinking here of place name like Henley-on-Thames. Is it Henley-on-Thames? Is it Henley without anything? Is it Henley upon Thames without hyphens? There are all sorts of different variations. If in the catches me out every time. So I don't know whether that can be. It might already be in place. I don't know, but it's just another thing for consistency, that just to allow passengers to actually find the places they intend going to.
And I have to say, as somebody coming from Magdalen, I'll just say Magdalen. That's all that I need to say. Magdalen. It is not how are you meant to know? I called it Southwark for the longest time, because I come from a country where you sound out the letters. Māori is written phonetically. You learn the punctuation, you can sound it out. Some friends basically pointed out that it's Southwark, and it was only listening to the information that I managed to figure out the place where I was stopping was called. I thought it was called one thing, and if I listened carefully, it was called something else. Although I used to think the Southern train was the 7 train, because it took me a long time with the accent of the person who was reading it out. Sounded almost like 7, and I couldn't figure out what they were saying till I figured out they're saying Southern. And they're saying Southern with that kind of Londonish Southern. Sounds a bit like 7 to the poor little Kiwi who's not heard that many accents before. Oh, it's wild to come to this country, I tell you. So when we're talking, we've got a few more minutes. Let's quickly run through accuracy. What does accurate mean? That might be, and it could be the same as consistent, or it could be different from consistent. But what does accurate mean? And if Tim says matches the schema, there'll be so much null pointing. Sorry, Leon, I talked over you there.
I just said, is the information correct or not? So does it actually match reality? Or, and it could be that it's sort of, I suppose, I don't know if it's accuracy or not. I suppose this is part of accuracy, but sort of how up to date the information is, how the recency of information. I mean, that's maybe a slightly different point, but it is reflected in accuracy, whether or not the information is up to date.
Recency.
On that score, we do try our best not to name bus stops after restaurants or pubs. We fail, but because sometimes that's the only landmark. but they're constantly shutting or renaming themselves these days. So, I mean, I'm sure we've mentioned that before, but anyway, just another thing to do with accuracy. It is the timeliness and the recency of that, of the information in the data.
Yeah, and it must be hard when the pub I mean, in New Zealand, one of the things of spotting a small town is, does it have a petrol station and an antique shop in the North Island? And here it seems to be, does the place have a pub? If it's got a pub, then it's a town. If it doesn't have a pub, then it's just a few houses that seem to be together. But the pub seems to be the one landmark that a lot of places have, which I totally understand. And they do change names an awful lot. Is there anything else on accuracy? Then I'm going to ask the third one, completeness. What does completeness mean?
But I'd say, are all the sort of fields complete? I mean, you probably need to have all the sort of mandatory fields, but there may be some optional fields that would be useful to have. So, are all the or as many of the optional fields populated as they could be?
So this, before Chris dives in, I'm about to. So clear down codes were deprecated in I'm going to say 2015, but I think it was slightly before that. We still have a field for clear down codes that obviously nobody uses because it's no longer a working technology. So should we complete that for completeness, or should we ignore that and just know that that is forever blank? And I'm not saying, I'm not being that pedantic, but it is trying to understand when there are non-mandatory fields, is it about being sensible, and what does sensible mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we shouldn't necessarily add everything just for the sake of it. But I mean, you have to think about use cases as well. And I mean, it could well be that there's a use case for some of these fields that we're not aware of. So that there could be benefit in that. So it's not necessarily a straightforward thing. One other sort of interpretation of completeness, well, I guess it's a slightly different application, is thinking about, let's say you're a local authority, and maybe you're missing some bus stops. So actually that's an indicator of completeness as well. Completeness would indicate that you have all your bus stops within NaPTAN.
Excellent. Chris, any thoughts?
I don't think really over and above what other people have been saying. No, I think as long as that basic set of data is there that we went over 10 minutes ago, then I think that is, for the most part, as complete as you need to go. I don't think you need to enter anything into fields that you're not using. But again, it's not an argument for taking those fields away. So yeah, I mean, I can't think of much else to add. I mean, knowing a lot of our NaPTAN data, I inherited many years ago, in actual fact, but it was put into practice 20 years ago when NaPTAN was first set up. So there's an awful lot of interesting stuff out there on routes that haven't been used a lot, or people don't make, public or bus operators will let us know what needs to be changed very often, but we rely on them too much, I think, very often. Completeness, I think as long as we have the complete list of stops, as you say there, Leon, I'm waffling. I have no more to say. Let's put it that way.
No, it's fine. Thank you. I'm aware that this has been a fairly intense 2 hours that we have. Yeah, we're 7 minutes off 2 hours. We've been discussing quite intently bus stops and like the what is where of a bus stop. The last one that I'm just going to touch on very, very quickly is metadata. So, and this is something where Diva has some weirdness in that it constantly is rewriting the created date. So I have things with a created date that is the same as the modified date, or even earlier than the modified date. So they're the wrong way. They're either the wrong way, not the wrong way round, but they're times. But also the time is taken down to, and I mean this quite sincerely, I have femtosecond precision on some data as to when it was put into NaPTAN. But I need to understand, is that, that's not really useful to anyone. We just need a day is more than enough, let alone time. But because it's a date time field, and it's kind of starting to corral people to get to look at their metadata as well, and just ensure that we've got the correct creation date and time for stops, because this then allows us to do some data provenance around this stop. The stop might have been created in 1996, for example, thinking of some of the ones up in Scotland. It was last updated in 2011. It's still completely fine. There are some stops that are brand new, and it's also around how we use some of the other parts of the metadata, how we use the statuses of new and revised, because I've got a whole pile of new stops that are on their 17th revision. So there's little pieces, and I'm not going to do it now because this is a huge deep dive and I need to bring some clear examples that will help people understand some of this, because starting to get this metadata right will allow us to pull things out of the data a little bit easier and say, you want the stops that have changed since you last pulled down your data, here's the 4 stops that have been updated, and we know this by the modified date or by the revision number, and so it just allows people to take much smaller pulls of the data, which is much more efficient, because if they're doing any transformation with the data, they don't have to repeat it all the time. They just need to pull across the 2 or 3 stops that have changed. It also makes it clearer for people what's changed, because one of the things that's come through from talking with some of the BODS people is, and this I think is just left hand, right hand, a lot of people are uploading data on a monthly or weekly basis. Fantastic, but nothing's changed within that data. And there's a difference between accuracy, recency, and actual changes, and the requirement to upload it is not, you shouldn't need to upload data on a weekly basis if you've not changed any stops. That's not actually adding to any of this. And it's, so how do we adapt how we hold data? How do we adapt how we push out data? How do we adapt how we talk about data so that it's much clearer? Chris uploaded some new data and he changed 5 stops, which is slightly different to what was done previously. Previously, it would count up the number, because it was going into a wonky SQL database, and it would count up the number of rows that it was pulling across and give you the differences. This would be much more, Chris has changed 5 stops, and you can get just the 5 stops that Chris has changed, or you can get the whole data set. And it's being able to do that means we've got to play around with the metadata, and getting into the metadata means looking at how Diva does it compared to how OmniFlag does it, compared to how every time I kick a stone, I find another homebrew system does it, and how do we get some consistency and some agreement, which may mean going back to those suppliers and saying, hey, half a sec, you're giving us, when I'm making changes, it's coming out like this in the XML, it needs to come out like this instead. That's some of the things that I think we definitely need a whole session on metadata, and I'll put that into the next piece. So we're going to run. We're all going to go have some lunch and have a break, grab some coffee because I need a second cup of coffee. I forgot to make myself a second cup of coffee before I started this. So I finished my coffee and now I'm desperate for one. Take some time, if you'd like, to throw us some feedback in the feedback corner. If you think this was good, let us know, because it actually helps me sell to the SRO board the time that I'm spending on this. It helps everybody understand that these are worthwhile. They're not just, they do actually come up with we do have the right discussions, and we do the right things. So I'm going to stop recording. But before I do, thank you for your time, your patience, your effort, your input. It's been great. Thank you, everybody. Stop sharing. Stop recording. Stop recording.